Okay, I have a great show for you today. We're all trying to figure out what is going on with the Russia Ukraine war, with Israel and Hamas, and also with our own members of Congress. To help me go through all of that, I have Colonel Daniel Davis on. Colonel Davis, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, thanks for having me back, Stephen. Appreciate it.
Yeah, so this is hot off the presses. I know that you've been dealing with media all morning, but I read that General Lloyd Austin has threatened to send American military men and women to fight Putin in Ukraine if he doesn't get the money from Congress for Ukraine to function as a government and to send more weapons to defend herself. What do you make of this news story? Are we about to have American boots on the ground pulled into this battle with Putin?
Yeah, other than the headline, I hadn't had a chance to actually see the details of what that is. But the first thing that strikes me is let's make sure we're all still clear. The United States Constitution is still in effect. And that means that we can't just send troops into combat zones unless we've been attacked or unless Congress makes a declaration of war. Don't remember either of those two things happening so far. So that's a no go. The Secretary of Defense does not have the authority, point blank, to send any combat troops into a war zone. I don't know what he plans on doing with them, but he doesn't have the authority to do that. So that's the first point. And then the second point is, God help us if Congress actually does authorize something like that, because that's not in our national interest. There is nothing in that war. I'm just telling you right now, the war is militarily unwinnable. We've been saying that for the since the outset of this war. On anyone who would listen, everything that has happened on the ground has validated that, and especially after now 6 months after they started this offensive operation, the Ukraine side did not even budge the line. If anyone was still in doubt, that should solve the problem for them. They should be clear on that. Why then would we want to reinforce failure and then try to deepen it and possibly get ourselves sucked into a war with a nuclear armed Russia? That is just absurd. And it just is very troubling that we're even thinking about it.
Yeah, barring a false flag, a CIA operation, or an actual attack from Russia, why would America want to jump in? And Putin, as evil as the media wants to make him out to be, he's been very calculated in his approach with NATO. He's been very calculated in his approach with Ukraine. I do not believe he wants war with the United States of America, and I don't believe we want war with him, especially the citizens of the United States. We're sick of all of these wars. So is this Austin just in his heart of hearts believing we need to continue to support the underdog, or is this him trying to meet obligations and funnel money back to the military industrial complex?
Well, I certainly can't speak to what his motivation is, because he'll be couching all kinds of different patriotic rhetoric, as it seemingly always is. But he did say on the second of this month, just a few days ago, that he claims that there are four really important reasons why it's compelling for the United States to do this. And one of the things he claims is that all of Western Europe and NATO would be directly threatened, was the term that he used, if Putin ends up winning here. And that's just nonsense. That's just absurd at face value. Again, you don't have to be an expert in this to figure this out. Just consider that after 22 months of all out war between Russia and Ukraine, against Ukraine, which has effectively no navy, a very limited air force, very low amounts of artillery, and missile systems, air defense capability, very limited, just enough to keep their major cities operating and open. And they have no allies. They have no treaty allies that will come to their state. Now, what possible sense does it make that Russia, who after 22 months can only have one sliver of 17% of that country that has no allies or any of those other aspects, would somehow go and march conventionally into Western Europe, into a 32 member NATO alliance that does have Article 5 guarantees, that has a very powerful Air Force and Navy, Space Force, and a robust mechanized force. Why would he ever do that? No one would do that. Putin, whatever you want to claim about him, he's not suicidal. Everything he has done, everything he has said, for the past 15 years is that he wants to protect his borders, and they are historically afraid of Western incursions because Russia itself has been invaded many times throughout its history from the West, and they're terrified of that. They're paranoid of it. They're afraid of being attacked. They're not wanting to recreate the Soviet Union because they don't have the capacity. And so, for Austin to claim those things is disingenuous, or he doesn't know what he's talking about. Don't know which it is.
Yeah, both are a little bit scary, just because a war, like you said, we don't want to be attacking another giant military that also happens to have more nuclear weapons than us.
Right.
Now, I read this. Putin has just ordered another 170,000 troops to be added to the Russian Federation army, bringing it to, I believe, over 1 million. Is NATO, or specifically Eastern European countries, are they wanting to go with war? Or are they actually maybe wanting to get back to trading with Russia so that they can lower their inflation costs?
Yeah, a lot of it depends on where they are on the map. Those who are closest to Russia are alarmed by that, and to a certain extent, I can understand why they would be. There's a lot of them in like Poland, Romania, and some of these others. They're saying, "Hey, we need to increase our military spending. We need to get our military better." There's an idea floating around among some circles of Europe that, hey, once Russia wraps this up within 5 years, they're going to rearm and rebuild, and then they're coming after us. So we have to start rebuilding our own force right now. And that's the classic thing. That's actually a slow motion draw into a war. That's kind of what happened in World War One, where one person thought the other side would do this, so they took action, and then it was responded to, and then you keep going up. At some point, we're going to have some leadership, and people are going to have to say, "Hey, what can we do to start actually lowering the chance of war?" And economically, I'm sure I think we've talked about it before in the past, is that all these sanctions that were leveled on Russia, and to try and punish them for what they did and their invasion of Ukraine. And let's be honest, that's exactly what happened. Whatever Russia's reasons were, they did invade this country. And so the response was, let's damage their economy, let's cause problems for their energy security system, all those things, and they backfired. Who's paying the biggest cost? It's not Russia. Russia has found a way to get away from this. Russia's economy grew in 2023. Most all the rest of it in the West shrunk. If that should be, a big note there. And to your point a second ago, there's plenty of nations that say, let's get this junk off the table. Let's get this wrapped up so that we can get back to doing business again and where it makes sense to us. And each nation gets to make their own choice about what their national security is and, how much trade they should do, how much they should build their military or what they should do. And every sovereign nation is right to make those own choices. But I assure you that the majority want to get war off the table, get back to just having a normal relationship with Russia, because, bud, no matter what happens, Russia's not going anywhere when this is over. Even if some of the fantasies of those in the West who wanted regime change, there's still going to be a Russia there, and it's still going to be ruled by somebody who probably doesn't like you. So let's try to normalize relations as much as we can, get the threat of war off the table for everyone.
Yeah, well, and most people don't, when you're playing chess, you've got to go multiple moves ahead. Most people aren't thinking ahead. Uh, who's the alternative to Putin? Is it someone who
Yeah.
isn't going to be as restrained? Is it someone who isn't going to be as calculated and strategic? My goodness, if it was Medvedev, he's threatened and hit every country
Right.
around him with nuclear bombs. We don't want that crazy bulldog back in office, right? And so
Yeah.
you have to think through that. But at the same time, here we have the federal government now saying we need to give $60 billion more of American taxpayer money. But I feel like we're on the backside of the bell curve where most Americans are like, hey, listen, my wallet is really, really tight right now. We're struggling. We feel like we're being invaded in our own country. Inflation is ravaging us, and yet you keep asking us to support the pensions of Ukraine, support the military of Ukraine. What about us? What about our veterans? What about our senior citizens? Do you think that Lloyd Austin and these tactics of saying, I'm going to send in military men from America, is that going to get the 60 billion, or do you think that they are going to have to come back with a smaller number?
I think they're without question, they're gonna have to come back with a smaller number, but right now, there's no guarantee that any number is gonna get passed. The debate, the big explosion in the Senate yesterday, was supposed to be an information briefing before Zelensky appeared on video to talk to him, was really is very illustrative of just where people are right now. The issue that was put on the table was, the Republicans want to tie border funding to your point about, how about taking care of us first? They want to tie that to anything for Ukraine. And of course the Democrats are saying no, no, we're not going to do it, and both of them are accusing each other of doing the wrong thing and causing problems. But what that shows you is that on both the Republican and the Democrat side, issues of domestic are far more important than anything about Ukraine. If Ukraine was as important to both sides as they say, they would just kick the can down the road on the border issue, because we've been having that issue for decades. So that's not a new issue. But the fact that now that we're putting that up in priority above Ukraine shows that they're not all that concerned about Ukraine. And look, I'm not going to blame them. How can you blame them when I can lay out graphically why the war is unwinnable? So whatever money you give, it's not going to win the war for Ukraine. It's not going to end the war. We need to do something different. And I think that we should lower that number a lot and just say, hey, we're only going to give you defensive weapons. We're not going to give you anything to launch some new offensive in 2024, which won't work. The last one didn't work. It certainly won't work when the Russian military is now even larger than it was before, and they have all this industrial capacity to make more. You need to make some kind of negotiated settlement. I'll leave that up to you. You can do it however you want to do it. You can ignore it and keep fighting, and we'll give you, something to help you defend yourself. But that's all. And then they can come to the rational conclusion. What we should not do is give any number with no strings attached, or say we're going to support you as long as it takes. I think we should get that out of the lexicon right away, because as long as it takes doesn't mean anything. And in fact, it's going to tie us into another losing strategy like what happened in Afghanistan, but on a larger scale and with far more bloodshed.
Yeah. Whenever the government is like, we're going to give you as much money as you want, and there's no accountability, it's like, okay, whoa, wait a minute. This is a really big red flag. And they keep
Huge.
raising that flag and saluting it in Congress.
Right.
Over on your show, Colonel Davis, the deep dive on YouTube, you've had a guest on, David Sachs, and on his Twitter feed today, he talked about how Ukraine was caught between two major parties, the globalists and the realists. The globalists said, you can beat Putin, you can beat Russia, and NATO has your back. And the realists said, we need to keep you neutral. We're not going to allow you to enter NATO, or else you'll be attacked. And now there are generals within Ukraine and former heads of state within Ukraine that are saying, we made the wrong choice. We went with the globalists, and now Ukraine could cease to exist. Half of our population now lives outside of Ukraine. The only reason they're a functioning country is because of American taxpayer dollars. So do you think that he's right that Ukraine got caught in this globalist versus realist battle and made the wrong choice?
Yeah, it's going to be years before we know all the things that happened behind the scenes about, and I'm talking about prior to February 2022. But you can just look at how things played out, and it's clear that that many in the West were happy to let Ukraine take the risk of a war on the ground because they wanted to harm Russia. I mean, we even said that in the beginning, and others actually intended to do so. We're happy to see Russia, suffer and have their military capacity reduced at the expense of Ukrainian blood. But I think some of them had this fantasy that Ukraine would actually win, that they would go back to the 1991 borders, which even today you have the Minister of Defense of Ukraine still claiming that's their objective, which is more eye rolling and unrealistic than ever. But they tied themselves to that. They made the choice to go with it. They could have said no at any time. There was many off ramps that could have been taken. None of them were. Now then, they've got buyer's remorse. I can only imagine how bad it is, and you see, it's many people like Arestovich, who was one of the chief state propagandists for the Kiev regime at the beginning. now is turning against them, and they're turning it on themselves, with the president and their the chief of their military, Zelensky. They're openly feuding, going for. So the thing's starting to fall apart. And it's with, I think, now becoming clear that what the realists had been saying from the outset, months before there was a war, you can't win this. You Russia is weaker than any of us thought, weaker than I believe that they were at first. They're making a big comeback now, but even in their weakened state, you couldn't have defeated them for very practical reasons. And now I think they're coming to realize and recognize the truth of that, and they're trying to find a way out. And it could be that the U.S. Congress and Senate provides that way out by not giving them the funds they're asking for and putting strings on it. That's probably the best, most realistic thing we can do for Ukraine. The most human rights thing we can do for Ukraine is to help them reach the right decision.
Yeah, oh, that's a good point. We're not going to give you the money, and we're now it immediately creates an off ramp, because everybody's been saying, "Where's their off ramp? Where's their off ramp?" And now this may be the off ramp that they've been looking for. I want to transition to Israel, but I just have an observation, and maybe you have some thoughts on it. But the Democrats used to be very anti-war. Now they are hell bent on getting as much money and as much help to Ukraine to fight Putin, even though it's very obvious that Ukraine was losing a lot of bodies and battles. But then now this Israel-Hamas situation has popped up, and they're like, don't go to war. And now they're defending Palestine. It's just really interesting how it's like they don't care if people are dying in one war, but they're very concerned if they're dying in a different war. And it's really interesting to observe like how people decide which side they're going to support. But either way, the United States is kind of stuck being pulled into what could be two major wars. Have you given any thought to that, as far as like how humans come up with this idea of which country to support?
Well, even that has got some pretty big caveats. They care about the Israeli people who are dying, though, but they seem to don't care anything about the thousands, tens of thousands of Palestinians, innocent Palestinians, who are being killed and wounded in this war. So it's pretty select on who they care about. But again, even going back to the Russia Ukraine stuff, it's curious that they seem unconcerned, at least in one capacity, on the Ukrainians people who are dying, because they want to keep supporting something that's just not going to happen. And no matter how bad you want to see Russia lose, how bad you want to see Putin hurt, the reality is that it's not going to happen. And if you keep trying to force that and to keep giving them money and support and tanks and planes and everything else they're asking for, all you're going to do is get more Ukrainians killed, and it's not going to change the outcome, Stephen. That's what they need to understand. They need to get somehow in their minds the reality that what they want to happen can't happen. It doesn't matter how much money you give. The fundamentals are not there, and it's just almost suicidal for Ukraine to continue to try. And now then you obviously have this issue you're talking about in Israel and Hamas. And oh, by the way, at the same time, they're also still saying, hey, and let's keep building infrastructure in Asia, because we may have to fight a war with China at some point, whether over Taiwan or something else. And and look, we don't have that much money. We had actually Senator Rand Paul on our show last week,
Okay.
and he made the point of, look, we don't just have these big piles of money sitting around with nothing to do, and we'll just put some here and there. We borrow it. And ironically, a lot of it is borrowed from China, that increases our national debt and increases our vulnerability economically to our own economy. And there's just not enough recognition of how all this weaved together and how vulnerable it makes us.
Yeah. I don't know if you've seen this meme or this image online, but it's somebody and they're in like a battle. I don't know what it is. It's like a command center, right? And they're sweating bullets, and there's a red button that says, take out Hamas. And then the other red button is kill innocent Palestinians, right? And the person's like, I don't know which one to do, right? How does Israel defend itself against Hamas and remove Hamas, but at the same time lessen the amount of innocent people that are being killed in Palestine. Like my brain is really struggling with how they do both at the same time.
Yeah, there's an answer to that. It is much, much harder to do the right thing than it is to do the easy thing. But if you care about Israel, if your objective is to see Israel and all the Jews that are living there, the millions of them, live in peace, they're going to have to do the hard, right thing instead of the easy thing, which they've been doing, which is instead of we had on our show earlier today, this scene of a build a complex of apartment buildings, high rises. I forget, 15, 20 stories. I don't know what it was, but they were all in a row, this, kind of prefab stuff. And just one by one, they're being wiped out and turned to rubble by the Israeli Defense Forces. So they're claiming, presumably, that they had actionable intelligence that said there was Hamas members inside there. Now, what the hard right thing to do is to send in your infantry and to clear the buildings like the Russians did in Bakhmut. They took 9 months to take that city. That's if you're going to try to keep the thing into tact. So you go in and you kill the actual people who committed atrocities against your people, the Hamas fighters. That's who you go against. Then at the end of that day, buildings would be significantly damaged under any circumstances, but then they could be repaired and brought back into a living conditions. As it is, they said, let's don't risk our infantry. Let's do it the easy way and just wipe the buildings out, and then anyone who is in there is dead. Well, also, now then you've got hundreds of people in that one block alone who now have nowhere to live, maybe thousands. I don't know how many people lived in those blocks, but now there's nowhere for them to live afterwards. Now, what do you think they're going to believe, and how are they going to react toward the Israeli government and the Jewish people when they see that their even means of living has now been wiped out? They're not allowed to leave the Gaza Strip, so now then they're destitute, and the best they're going to do is live under a bridge somewhere or in a tent with no hope for the future. They're not going to live at peace with Israel at the end. If you want any chance to live at peace, for the Jewish people to live in peace, then you will support the hard right thing, even if it takes a year or more to do, by keeping the infrastructure in existence so that there's at least the hope for the Palestinian people that at the end of this, they can live a life and at least have a chance for some kind of future after the end of this. If the Palestinian people have no hope, then even if you get rid of all of Hamas, you're going to have much worse fall in its path, because the hatred for Israel will be even higher than it was before. And it can be done, Stephen, but there's a hard right and there's an easy wrong, and the easy wrong is going to be worse for you than it was on 10/7.
Yeah. Colonel Douglas McGregor said to me one time, he said, as time has passed, that he's noticed is Congress hides behind the military more and more every year, and they use military force versus true diplomacy. And that's what I worry is happening here, where Israel is like, okay, right now is our shot to use a lot of military force versus true diplomacy. But my worry is, they're angering the rest of the world against them. So they're losing the PR war, even though, they were attacked. But at the same time, like you're just setting up the next generation to hate you again. It's almost like, the Marshall Plan, where the United States came in and helped rebuild Japan. And now we're great allies, and it's a tragedy in our past. But now there's a friendship and a mutual respect. I just worry if they just leave this thing completely decimated, tons of innocent women and children killed, the next generation is going to be double angry. I don't know. I wonder where the real diplomacy is versus the military might.
Yeah, I mean that's a better way of what I was just saying a second ago. If there's no hope for the Palestinian people, then all they have left is more anger and more hatred, and they'll try to strike out however they can. And that's assuming that Israel can keep the support of the West, because there's many in America who are seeing these images come out, especially of these children being killed routinely on the Palestinian side, who just want to survive. The words that the Israelis are being discriminated in their bombings is just falling on deaf ears, increasingly so. And if they lose the support of the West, especially the United States, then they're going to be in even more trouble. And it's conceivable that they might not even be able to win this over time, tactically and militarily, because they lose support from the West. And we already know they don't have support in the Arab world, who is very much against them. That's why Israel has to do the hard right thing. And you're right. The way you put it is better. They need to do diplomacy. And that's a great example. I keep hearing many in Israel say this. Oh, well, the United States went after Germany and Japan in World War II, and they conquered them and they lived peaceful afterward. Yeah, that's because, number one, we didn't start that war. But number two, immediately after it, we helped them rebuild. We allowed them freedom and peace, and they had a hope. That was the whole point. They had a hope, and we're there to help them get it. But right now, there's not even a plan for Israel to help the Palestinian people have a hope. And until that changes, they will not have peace. That's just the bottom line.
Yeah, that's again, yeah, well put. I just keep thinking like, okay, how do they take out Hamas without all the collateral damage that angers the rest of the world? And then there has to be some way to help rebuild, like they did with Japan or Germany, or else it's just we're going to be talking about this in 10 or 20 years again.
Yeah.
So I don't
It'll
know what
just
the
never
right
stop.
answer is. I'm not a politician. I'm not. I have no military back. I'm just a guy on YouTube that sits and ponders on this stuff a lot. Like it really has bothered me because I see the images of 7 Hamas people attacking and raping an Israeli woman. I also see the dead, bloody bodies of children in North Gaza, and I go, these are both awful.
Yes.
It's hard to hold it in my head, So I don't know what the right answer is. I hope that people smarter than me will continue to work with Israel on the correct course forward.
Well, I think you know the right answer. I mean, you've kind of laid it out there. It's that Israel has to think beyond the anger of 10/7, and they have to say, even though we're in a position of military power over Hamas, we've got to look to the future, and we've got to be able to build something that can be sustained so that we're not constantly having to go through these fights. And that means doing things they don't want to do. That means being much more selective and meticulous in their military operations, and working with the Palestinian people. Just imagine if they actually gave the Palestinian people reason to turn against Hamas by saying, "Hey, we want to help you out. We want you to live in peace. We want you to have a future and a hope, and we're going to help fund it. And the faster we can get Hamas out, the better." I mean, that's at least a theoretical possibility, which right now it's off the table, and Israel's not even taking advantage of that.
Yeah, yeah. Oof, complex stuff. Now, you have a podcast, Deep Dive. I want to make sure to put a link to that so that people can follow you. Tell us just a little bit about that podcast.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And it's something we have, is that, when you watch the news, you might see a 3-minute segment on something, or you may see, like, for example, a show we did earlier today where you see a statement by an Israeli public official, or an American official, somebody in the White House, or something. You see they make a statement. You don't know whether it's right or not, or you may not have enough information beneath that. So we have this show called the Deep Dive, Daniel Davis Deep Dive, to where we go underneath the headlines and behind the scenes to tell you what's really going on, and kind of help interpret some of the things that these people are saying, and tell you some of the things that they're not telling you, and some of the things that are keeping off the table because they rightly, in most cases, conclude that the audience doesn't know some things. But we'll illuminate the truth behind it so that you can see with your own eyes and come to your own decisions about what you want to believe and what you think is true, not just what they're telling you to believe. And of course, in 3 minutes, you can't get to that. So our segments are longer than that, where we explain some things. We've had pretty good success so far, but it's something that it's just a labor of love for us. We love to be able to give people the truth and an unvarnished opinion. We're not to the right, we're not to the left. We're for America, and we want Americans to have the truth. And so we do that every day.
Right. Yeah, that people don't realize you need content and context to really
Yes.
understand
It's a
deeply
great way to put it.
a situation. And you guys, you have the content. There's more than enough content, but now we need context. We need military thinking. We need, okay, here's my connections here. Here's this special guest. And so you guys do a great job, and I'll make sure to put a link down below.
I
Colonel
appreciate that.
Davis,
Thank you.
thank you so much for spending time with me and helping us understand these two horrific wars and how the heck we might be able to get out of them. So I hope you have a great rest of your day.
I appreciate it. Thank you, and same to you.